Today's class is offered to the general public by the BYU Family History Library. Questions related specifically to the family history work of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints should be addressed on an individual basis with one of our missionaries, either in person or virtually. Our presenter is Elder West, who has a love of learning and an extensive background in family history and genealogical research. We hope you will find your time with us productive and enjoyable. I'll now turn the time over to Elder Franklin West.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to listen today. This is a class on JIAPU. The JA meaning family is the very first letter up there, and the second one is Pu. That's how you say genealogy in Chinese. You probably know that. There are also about 50 other ways you could say it, so it's going to show up in a number of different places. But in general, when people start talking about their genealogy in China, it's talking about these two characters. This class is specifically about considerations in researching and recording Chinese genealogies. This assumes that you already know how to use family search, perhaps ancestry, and that it's not about that. It's about what's different about Chinese genealogies from doing regular genealogies in Europe or England or something like that. The considerations are different. So that's why it's considerations rather than the whole thing. The intended audience for this is American-born Chinese. That is, there are very many people who are first or second generation Chinese here in the United States or in a number of other areas as well. So this assumes that you probably don't know how to speak Chinese, you probably don't have much knowledge of the characters, but either your father, your grandfather, parents, or grandparents were from China. It is also for those that are not familiar with characters or the spoken Chinese language. So if you're interested in doing this and you want to find out about them, this is the place to be. So the first thing to ask is, should you really be in this class? Because you have to have a love of Chinese things. I was a missionary in Hong Kong back in the late 1960s, and it's just one of the most seminal things that's ever happened to me in my life. As a result, I've had a continuing interest in China and Chinese things. So I'm going to tell you some things that I really like about China, and you think what you would say if you were to do that. So for instance, up here, Anhui. Most Chinese people would see Anhui and then think of one thing in particular, a famous geological site. Hong Kong, where I served my mission, Suzhou, a city very close to Shanghai, and Hangzhou, which is another city near Shanghai. So if you were thinking about this, you might come up with the following. So in Anhui, that's where the Huangshan, the Yellow Mountains are. And these towering mountains that come up through the clouds. I've been there, and it's just a stunning, stunning place. And most Americans don't know about it, but it's a stunning place. In Hong Kong, it's the Peak or the Dragon's Back. Those are famous places. Suzhou. This is actually from Suzhou. This is the humble administrator's garden, which is not humble at all or small. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. One of the probably the most characteristic Chinese gardens anywhere in the world. And Hangzhou, the reason I like that is my name is West, and the name of the lake is West Lake. So I've always thought, well, that's my lake. And when I got there, it's a beautiful spot as well. But most people that are involved with China are, if you're linked in through your ancestors, you have a natural feeling for it, or if you've been a missionary there. And I found it just to be an absolutely fascinating study. And so that's why I've gotten involved in it. We are going to answer, this course has 4 sections. I'm going to do the first 2 sections today, and the next 2 sections later, or next week. And we will answer questions not at the end, we'll do it at the end of the session, which will probably be about half an hour. The objectives of the course are twofold. First, suggest a structure for showing you an overall strategy for beginning your Chinese genealogy. Most people don't know where to start. There's some complicated things that I'm going to go through that you just don't know where to do. So I'm going to say, here's where you should start, and here's how you should go sort of step by step. Second thing is to help you know where to help to start researching and recording your genealogy. So where do you start at the beginning, and then how do you record it once you've done all this research, The agenda for the fourth class, there are 4 sections. I'm going to be going through the first 2 today. And the first one is the importance of Chinese characters. And you'd think doing Chinese genealogy, the number one thing would not necessarily be Chinese characters. And secondly, you might think, well, that would scare me away. But it turns out that if you don't deal with the Chinese characters, you can't do it. And there are a number of reasons for that I'll go through. The second thing is what you need to know in order to get started. That is, in order to start doing genealogy in mainland China or in Taiwan or even in Hong Kong, you have to know several things. You have to know the Chinese characters for your ancestor, the Xingming, and your ancestor's ancestral home, such as Xiangchun, Zuwu, or Cunzhuang. So I'm going to go through those first 2 sections today. Now, the importance of Chinese characters. That is, why is it that we have to do Chinese characters? Because Chinese characters are hard. And everybody's going to look at it and look at a Chinese character, and how would you know anything about that? And so a lot of people have that problem. I certainly had this when I went over in Hong Kong. I was a missionary there. And I asked somebody what my name should be, and they said, well, here's a good name. And they gave me these 3 characters on the first line. It says Mui Lap Fan. I thought it was a great name. It sounded fun. I had no idea what it was all about. But every time I would go into a classroom or talk to somebody and tell them that my last name was Mui, especially the women would always laugh at me, because Mui means plum blossom. So you'd say elder plum blossom. You didn't do your first name right. You just say elder plum blossom. And so after about a month, I realized why I was laughing. So I changed it to something a little safer. The second one, which is Sai Gokman. Well, Sai is West. That's my last name. I thought all should choose that. Well, there are 2 problems with choosing this. One is Sai is not a real Chinese last name, so they don't take you seriously. Second thing is the next 2 characters, Gokman, the name of the political party in Taiwan is the Kuomintang. So here it looks like I am in favor of Taiwan. You go into the mainland, and that's not going to go very well. So I had a problem with that. Finally, after I left, I came back and I picked a couple of characters I knew no one would have any problems with. First one is the name of a country. The second one is peace, and the third one is virtue. And so I haven't had much of a problem with that since then. So you need to know something about characters, and learning about them is very interesting. Now, the reason why it's important, other than getting your name right as a missionary, is an example here. When you input the person's name, the Chinese name, into Family Search, you have to put in the characters. So down here, you can see this person's name, Guang Xianjing. That's what, don't put in Guang Xianjing. You put in these characters up here. So you have to know how to put those characters in. So that's sort of a difficult thing to figure out how to do. So unless I can make that into a simple thing, then you're not going to want to have anything to do with it, probably. Now, the reason why you have to do things in Chinese characters, because the alternative is to do them using something called a romanization. So for instance, if you're looking at this verb right here, which means to go, and this name, my last name right here, which is Wei. If you're doing it in Mandarin or Putonghua, it's pronounced as Chu and Wei. But if you're in Cantonese, doing it down in Hong Kong or Guangzhou, it'll be Hui and Ngai. So if you were to put in Ngai, it would totally only pick it up for the Cantonese part of things. Whereas when you put in the character, that character means go in either Cantonese or in Mandarin or any of the other 10 dialects that are there. So you have to use the characters because the characters are the only things which don't change. There are actually 10 major dialects in China that use Chinese characters, so it's a really big problem. Now, what they have done in order to make Westerners like us understand Chinese is they have Romanized the characters. What a romanization does, it means make it into something that we can say. Unfortunately, there are a number of different strategies for doing this. For instance, in Mandarin, there's the Wade-Giles format, and there's the Pinyin format. The problem is, looking at the very same character, you're going to pronounce it totally differently. So the first one, Tsai, in the Wade-Giles is TS''AI, but in Pinyin, which is in China today, it's CAI. They're both pronounced Tsai, but they're spelled differently. So you've got that, if somebody tells you his name is Tsai, then you don't really know which character necessarily it is. So the most useful romanization going forward is Pinyin, which is the romanization used in China. Only about 70 or so years old. Problem is, a lot of the people you're going to be dealing with did not have that around. So that's one of the reasons why you have to know the Chinese characters. Now, the good news is, the bad news is you have to know the Chinese characters. The good news is it's not really as hard as it looks. So I'm going to show you two things that make it so that it's actually not that difficult and you'd be able to do it. I've trained a number of people to do this relatively quickly. You can pick up everything you need to know about Chinese characters. So the first thing you need to know is that every Chinese characters, and there are tens of thousands of them, are composed of pieces. They're bits and pieces. Those bits and pieces are called radicals. And this is the list. There are about 200 of these radicals. So there are only about 200 things that you have to write in doing Chinese. And the most common ones, probably maybe the 30 or 40, are not that difficult to get to see. The second thing is about Chinese radicals is this is the way that they organize the dictionary. We do it alphabetically. They do it by the number of strokes in the character. So they'll do it for the first stroke. So up here, the very first one is the radical number is number 1. The Chinese character for that is just a horizontal line. And then in Pinyin it's pronounced yi. Now that's one stroke. The next one is a stroke. Each one of those until you get down to these 2 strokes at the bottom. And you can see here a person is 2 strokes coming down that way. So it's fairly easy to just look at something, and if you know the radical, you should be able to choose the right thing. Now, my name is a particularly good example of this. So my last name is Wei, and it's the name of a country in the Warring States period about 200 to 400 years BC. That country existed. So everybody knows that. So when I tell people what my name is, I say it's Wei, the Warring States period of time. Now that is composed of 3 radicals. The first radical is he, which means grain. The second one is ni, which means woman. And the third radical is gui, which means ghost. So it's combined those. Now it's fairly easy for me to remember my name because each one of the radicals is very straightforward, and you see those radicals all the time. The gui one is not quite as often said, but one for women, for grain, those characters show up all the time. So what you want to do is to be able to recognize these radicals in there. If you know the 200 radicals, or even a subset of about 50 probably, then you'd be able to see how these names are structured. Now, the other thing that's very helpful is there are some great dictionaries out there right now that help you to be able to do this. There's one called PLECO. It's a phone app. It's free. It's outstanding. And so it makes it so that even if you don't know anything about Chinese characters, you can use it. The other thing is in Google Chrome, Google Translate is an excellent way to translate words. And you also can change your keyboard so that you can input Chinese characters. And it's not as difficult as it sounds. Now, for instance, on the PLECO Chinese dictionary, this is the name for dragon up here. You'll notice up the upper left-hand side, there's a character there, which is a law character. And then one down at the bottom, yeah. Law means to stand, yeah means to the moon, month. The right one, I'm not sure it's a standalone character, but by putting these in, you can just draw them directly the way you see them, and then it will translate it for you. It comes down here and gives you a whole bunch of options that are available for you for being able to do the translation. See, this first one looks like it's the right one. You click on that, hit done, and then it tells you what the character is, how to draw it, how to say it. Gives you a whole bunch of things that you can see with it. So you can see over here they put up Zhongguo, and it shows a whole bunch of combinations that shows up in. So you find that this is very helpful and it costs nothing. So you need to look it up that way. You can look it up by the radical. The little puzzle piece up above allows you to do that. It includes other dialects. So up here, Mei Hao is how you say that in Mandarin. Or you'd say Mei Ho in Cantonese, which is Yuping. Yuping is the Cantonese romanization they're using. Last thing is it gives you both simplified and traditional characters. In mainland China, they only use simplified characters. In Taiwan and Hong Kong, they only use traditional characters. So you need to see both. And up here at the top, see on Zhongguo, Guo, the second character there, is a simplified character, but it shows you in parentheses what the original traditional character is. So it's a very powerful tool to be able to have available. You also probably just need to memorize a couple of common terms. I mean, when you're doing a JIAPU, you want to be able to recognize if somebody's talking about it. And nobody will say JIAPU without knowing that's genealogy. You know how to say mother or wife, Chin or B, father, Fuqin, or a male child, not. There are a number of these, so there are about 15 or 20 of these characters you just need to memorize. Those aren't particularly difficult to do. And you can actually turn your keyboard into a Chinese keyboard. I tried doing this on a number of computers and found out it was different on each one. And certainly different for Android versus an iPhone. But it'll be something like this, somewhere in the settings. You'll really get it down, and you can. One you probably want to use is the simplified, which is from the People's Republic of China. And then you can put those in, and that's how you actually input it into Family Search. Now, if I've convinced you that you need to use Chinese characters, great. If I haven't, then I probably need to talk to you, because I can convince you by showing you and working with you for a period of time, not too long, that you can see that you can use those. And it turns out not to be difficult. I've probably had 3 or 4 people that after not that long, they were getting so they could input things into their JIAPU. Now, once you know that Chinese characters are important, you've got to go find the Chinese characters for your ancestor. So the minimum information you need to get started in finding your JIAPU is what I'm going to go through next. There are 2 things you have to have. If you don't have it, you can't do it. It just won't work. So it's really important. The 2 key pieces are you need to have the 3 Chinese characters for the name of an ancestor who last left China for another country. Now, usually this is the most difficult part in getting started. People do not know what their parents' or grandparents' name are written in characters. Many of those people are dying off, and you're going to lose that capability. So I'm going to show you different ways that you need to go about that. Second thing that you need to know is the Chinese characters for the small ancestral village in which a JIAPU for this family might be found. So you have to know the person's name and characters. It's going to be 3 characters. And then you need to know the name of the village. So I'm going to try to show you a couple of ways to find this, because it's not that easy to find. You'd think that people would write it down somewhere, but they generally don't. Well, where can you look for some of these things? Here we've got 6 different places we can look. So let's go through each one. First one, which is the gold standard, I've actually had this happen to me twice, is the person actually has their JIAPU. You don't have to go hunt it up. And if that's the case, then you can just skip to section 3, because you don't have to worry about how to find it. Turns out you'll probably find that this happens infrequently. Almost always, you're going to have to go out and find it yourself. And it's usually some special circumstance that works. So you need to go through that. If you did find a JIAPU, this is a typical one. One of the people I'm working with right now. And you can see it has, they go from right to left and from top to bottom. So these are all the genealogies, gives all the names. These are all first names of different people. The assumption is that this is all the Kwong family. So you get all of those things. And periodically they'll say some things like, this person lived in Jiangmen. which is one of the areas there at Canton. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get that. If you can get that, then you're right. Then you need to go to your parents, your grandparents, and try to find out the Chinese name in characters from the family records. And most of them have some of these somewhere, so there's some place. It's always some different place. So here you can see they've taken, they don't even know what this lady's name was right here. So it's got a Kwang Xiaojie, which just says Miss Kwang. Here it has both the way he was known, the romanization, and the actual Chinese characters right here. Now this was golden because we had to know those Chinese characters in order to know where it fit into the job. So, where's another place you can get it? This actually turned out to be relatively accurate. So over here on the right are all the Pinyin romanizations for the people in this family. On the left are the names that they were actually used in business. They were from Hawaii. And so that all showed up there. But the ones on the right are all the ones that are correct. You don't have the characters, but at least you know what the Pinyin romanization was. The second place you can find these from gravestones. This isn't always true because you have to have somebody who had enough money to find a gravesite and get a gravestone. But this particular one, which is over in Hawaii, I have a second generation person I'm working with right now. His grandfather came over to Hawaii back in the 1890s, and he had several sons. And this is actually one of his brothers. So this is, we actually found this very interestingly. It's about 5 minutes walk from this fellow's home in Honolulu. And he'd never been over there until I told him to start looking around for this stuff. This particular stone has everything you want to know about this ancestor. The first thing you want to know is you want to know what his actual name was. Kwang Ho Jing. So up at the top, it says his name was Train Fong. His last name was not Fong, it was actually Kwang, because the romanizations are never correct. Train is not a Chinese name. So it's got his name up there. You probably can't see it that well. It says Train Fong, father. He recorded all the rest of it in Chinese. So here, his actual name was Ho Jing. And that almost proves that he's the brother of the grandfather. Then there's small village in China from which he is from. This is right over here. It's from Taishan, Chongyuan, Chaoxi. So we've got his name and characters. We've got the little village he was from. And most of the time you don't get this, or you get birth and death dates. Interesting that the birth date is in the Chinese method, which I will tell you about shortly. And the Western method is used for when you die. So here, we've got a death date in Chinese. This was a golden piece to get. Now, the Chinese method is used for dates. It does not follow the calendar. So what it does is it starts from, you have to find out what emperor was the emperor at the time. You find out when his reign began, which in this case it was the Emperor Qing Tongzhi. And the reign began about 1861. In the 9th year, in the 8th month, and the 14th day. We add all that up, and it comes out that it's the 14th of August, 1871. So there's some things like this that you're going to need some help with because it's not going to be obvious how that works. Now they do have a lot. They do have a lot of stones. This is one in Hong Kong. The problem is you don't get to usually stay there for too long. But interestingly enough, they've got a lot of information on here. If you go through here, you might be able to find little bits and pieces of information that would not otherwise get. And these are their whole hillsides in Hong Kong. This is in Taiwan, where they have it. Here's another example of a very nice grave that tells you everything you need to know. The last name here is Tsang. And name was, says this is where he was buried, gives his birth date, gives his death date, and then it says where he was from. He's from Guangdong, Taishan, Chong, something, something, something. Down here, the last name is Hua Chun. When you get down to Chun like that, then you're at the right place. So this is something I hadn't thought about before, but since we found it, it's been very helpful. Find things is in obituary. And this is the fellow we're talking about, Huang Xinjing. But if you look up here, none of these characters are correct. And he's got his name pronounced incorrectly. And he's got the wrong characters in here. We call him Huang Ting, which is what he was actually known as, but that is not, those are not his characters. So even though you get some information here, oftentimes it's not very accurate. The thing that was the most accurate was his association with Chinese associations in Honolulu. So he was an officer in the Chinese association there. And their main purpose was to help people who were coming over from China to be able to get integrated into this society. And it says over here that he was sort of the vice president of this. Gives the name by which he was known, Kuang Ting, which is not his name. It gives, then interestingly, that gives his Zi name. The Zi name is the name that we want to be able to put into family search. And so then you can see it says Xian Jing. Those are the exact characters we need to know. We're going to put in something into family search. We need to know in general the Zi name. That's it. It also lists where he was from. Guangdong, Taishan, and Chongyuan, Xiang. Because he was 54 years old at the time. That was a real find. Women, unfortunately, are not very often taken care of in genealogies. They don't usually even show up. But periodically, there will be some signs that will let you know that it's a woman. See the one up there, this character. This is one of the characters you have to memorize. Because it means whoever's name is there, that was her, she was the mother. She was the one who was in charge. They also use Pei-O, that's used instead of a wife's name periodically. And most frequently, they'll list the name of the family they're from. This is the Chun family. And this just says that's the family. So Chun family, that's where they're from. So you know the last name, but you don't know what their first name was. And a little later, when we record these next week, I'll show you how to handle that. Unfortunately, they did the same thing here with Ho Jing, the fellow that we had before. His wife also got a separate gravestone, and it has all the same information from her. And here we can tell that B character at the front says it was the wife of a Huang, but it says she was from the family, the Huang family. It also tells where she's from and what her birth and death dates are. So women are always a problem, and you have to, you're probably not going to get all the information you need. You can usually get enough information so that we can do the work for it. Once you have the name, you can begin to search for your ancestors in your JIAPU. Now, the one we're looking for is Xian Jing. And it turns out that there's an opening right here. There should be another person right here. This is the person we found on that gravestone. We know it's his brother. So therefore, for some reason, they didn't put it in the JIAPU. We also know that this was his other brother's name. So therefore, he slots right in. So we knew his name. We know where he's from. Right up here, this is the name of the little town that was on his stone, and also for the one who was working for the Chinese Association. So once you do that, then you can start, you need to go get the JIAPU and then be able to start putting things in, looking for it. So that's the end of the session today, the first two sections. So we've talked about why it's important to understand Chinese characters. And secondly, what are the two most important things you have to have before you can do any research? You have to know what the person's name was in Chinese characters, and you have to know the name of his ancestral village, a very small location, which will have a JIAPU.